Hello, all, and welcome to the second part of Speed Mooting's Pupillage Event. Tonight being the Q&A session. So, my name is John Dove. I'm a criminal barrister and founder of Speed Mooting. I'm assisted tonight by Hayley, who's also a director over here at Speed Mooting. And tonight, you will have your questions answered in relation to pupillage. So we've got a super panel of 8 barristers who are excited to be answering your questions. So I think without further ado, I will jump in and ask our barristers to give you a short introduction. So we'll start with Alice Kuzmenko.
Hello, everyone. I am Alice Kuzmenko at One Crown Office Row. I'm in my 5th year of tenancy, and my main areas of practice are personal injury and, in particular, clinical negligence. I do public law, sort of broad judicial review, but also education law as a specialism, and inquest and inquiries.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Anna Walsh.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name's Anna. I am a family barrister. I qualified as a solicitor in 2004, transferred to the bar in 2013, so have around 20 years experience, practicing only really in children law, so care proceedings and private law. I also sit as an arbitrator and as an assistant coroner.
Thank you. Up next, Gabrielle Coates.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabrielle. I'm a barrister at St Paul's Chambers, which is in Leeds. I finished my pupillage in September 2024, so a little less experience than those that have gone before me. I mainly do crime, but I also do prison law and any civil that crosses over with crime, like police work.
Thank you. Up next, Gerjo Kaur.
Evening, everybody. My name's Gerjo Kaur. I am a barrister with the CPS in the North East. I will be 4 years qualified in March. I had a COVID pupillage, so you can feel sorry for me if you like, but I survived, and that's the main thing. And I've only ever done prosecution work, never done defence, and clearly worked in crime.
Thank you. Next, we have Hannah Fountain.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Hannah. I am a family barrister practicing at New Street Chambers in Leicester, which is quite a small civil and family set. I completed my pupillage in 2015, so have been at my current chambers for over 10 years now. I practice in all areas of family law, so that is matrimonial finance, private law children, and public law children, as well as anything domestic abuse related.
Thank you. Up next, Jade Sadipo.
Hi everyone, I'm Jade. I am like Gerja. I qualified with the CPS in 2021 and did a COVID pupillage. I only prosecute and I only do crime, and I'm based in London South Crown Court team, so I do mainly Crown Court advocacy now.
Brilliant, thank you. Matthew Todd.
Hello everybody, I'm Matthew Todd. I practice at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester. I've been in tenancy for about year and a half now. I mainly do employment law, but I also do a bit of civil, and I used to do crime, but nothing particularly complex, so don't ask me any difficult questions.
And last but not least, Rachel Coyle.
Hi, I'm a barrister at Exchange Chambers, and I practice property and commercial work. I started life at the bar, doing pupillage down in London, and then decided I fancied staying in London for a little while, and that was in 2015, 2016, and then I came back to the north in 2023. So yeah, so I've been a little bit all over, but that's me.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. We've got a really broad range of practice areas and levels of expertise, so hopefully all of your questions can be answered tonight. So I'll jump in with question 1. And the question is this: if you were currently applying for pupillage, what would your #1 piece of advice be? And we'll start with Alice Kuzmenko.
My main piece of advice is taking into account quality over quantity. I know with passing years, it seems that you can throw in more and more applications into the gateway, but that I think can end up with you putting in too many that are a bit thin in their quality, which means that then on SIFT, they are very easily put to one side because it will be obvious to your reviewers that you haven't actually put your heart into it, that it's not your #1 set. And so I think rather than being sort of competitive with your colleagues perhaps about how many you've put in and thinking that improves your chances, my key advice would be to pick the ones that you would genuinely want to go to, that you have a real interest in, and really focus on impressing them and getting to know the chambers in your best possible sense. And that will mean that you end up with an application of quality that's more likely to get through to the next round.
Thank you very much. Great advice there. Anna, anything to add to that?
Yes, I would echo that. I think that's very good advice. I think also remember that it's completely a given that you will be academically very good and you will be competing against lots of people who are in the same boat. And so you need to have something that stands out. And I think what you can't underestimate is life experience and what that gives you, because it's all very well being academically incredibly strong, but you need to be able to relate to people and speak to people, because as you will learn, being a barrister, being a lawyer, you see people at their most vulnerable. You only really come to a lawyer when you're having some difficulties. And so you need to be able to relate to people and speak to people. So any other work experience that you can get where you are doing that sort of thing, whether it's law clinics, shadowing, mini pupillages, charity work, you really need to make sure that that stands out in your CV so that you have something over and above the strong academics, which is a given because you'll only get interviewed if you've got those strong academics. So that would be my advice.
Brilliant. Great advice there. And lastly on this question, Gabrielle, anything to add?
Yes, I'd echo what Anna's said, and I think that's really important is, you know, just to have legal work experience isn't the only work experience, and transferable skills are super important. I think I referred to McDonald's in my application, and the fact that, you know, when the ice cream machine broke, everyone was furious at me and I had to manage all them complaints. And it's very similar to criminal law when people are grumpy that they're going to prison and you have to manage them and tell them the bad news. But my top tip would probably be to think about the hobbies and interests and make sure that you have them on your application form. I think it's really hard to stand out because everyone's really amazing, and that's why they're applying. But I often think when people are looking at applications, they are looking at hundreds and thousands of applications, and you want to be able to stand out. In my application, I referred to the fact that I had 2 miniature dachshunds, which got the dog lovers interested. And then I also referred to the fact that I, in COVID, turned a van into a camper van, completely irrelevant to law. No one cares if it was legal, but it just shows that I'm an interesting person. And I think I got asked about it at every interview. So be you and show yourself through the application.
Brilliant. Great pieces of advice there. And with that, we'll jump on to question 2. So our second question this evening, with the exception of mini pupillages, what are the best ways to obtain legal work experience? Gersha, would you like to start us on this one?
Firstly, before I deep dive into that, I echo what Gabrielle said. It's not just about legal work experience, and also what Anna said. A lot of your application will be about your other non-legal experience, so just to take that into consideration. In terms of legal experience, obviously mini pupillages are important, but the question was what other things can be done or looked at. There's nothing stopping you from going into a public gallery in a magistrate's court or a crown court for crime. I can only speak from that point of view. And sitting in a gallery and actually getting a first-hand experience in terms of advocacy, seeing how judges advocate as well, and getting a sense of what cases do actually come through the courts on a day-to-day. I would encourage people to do both magistrates and Crown Court. You will see a significant difference in the advocacy between sort of counsel, between advocates and the magistrates court. So I would encourage people to do that. I know when I was doing sort of experience, if you like, when I was at university, I did an internship. It wasn't paid, but I did it nonetheless. And that gave me an insight into a law firm in Nottingham, where that was a completely different experience as well, to see things from a firm point of view. And ultimately, it's going to be those firms that will instruct you if you are lucky enough to get into chambers. So that was quite helpful. And it allowed you to actually make some make some connections, if you like, as well. You never know when those people might come in handy in the future. But and I guess the most obvious one is sort of paralegal work as well. And what I would say is, when I was a paralegal before I got pupillage at the CPS, my paralegal work was in corporate commercial law, a complete 360 from what I do now in terms of crime. And I say that because what you think you might want to practice in the future might not necessarily be what you end up doing. So don't sort of knock back any opportunities that might present themselves, because I was determined I was going to do a civil pupillage, and clearly that wasn't what happened for me. So just be open to any opportunities. But that's what I did anyway when I was looking for pupillage.
Yeah, great advice there, Gerjo, and I completely echo that actually. Something I used to do a lot when I was a student would go to court and sit in the public gallery, and taking it just one step further, on those days when you do go to court, if you see any sort of barristers or solicitors who don't look too busy, you might see them in the concourse, in the waiting area, go and introduce yourself, go and have a chat, because you never know what you might learn just from speaking to that barrister or solicitor. And then taking it one step further, you can even be cheeky and say, you know, does your firm offer experience, your chambers offer work experience? Can I shadow you one day? The worst they'll say is no, but at least you've got a ticket in the lottery, as it were. So it's a great way of potentially expanding your CV. Next on that question actually is Hannah Fountain.
Hi there, everyone. I would definitely agree with everything that Gerjo and John have said in terms of this answer already. And particularly sort of the paralegal work, if that's something that you can obtain. I realise it's highly competitive, but it's definitely worth something looking into. One of the other things that you can do is marshalling, which can be really valuable experience in terms of sitting from the judge's perspective rather than just the advocates. And then obviously you get to see all of the advocacy from a judicial perspective. So that can be really beneficial. Any sort of work experience that you might be able to get in a solicitor's firm, even if that is something like a week where you are doing general administrative type tasks, because you'll get to see what goes on in the background in terms of just general legal work experience. So any local solicitors firms, even if they're small, is a really great opportunity just to see how it works, and indeed then see the relationship between solicitors and barristers in terms of when firms instruct counsel and how that works, and the volume of paperwork that we deal with on a fairly regular basis. I don't know if it's still the LPC law or county court advocacy. That's also another really good way of getting hands-on advocacy experience, even if it's not in the area in which you hope to practice. But that's a really good way of getting used to the court system and dealing with other advocates, and just seeing how the court process works and getting that hands-on experience. Also, for those who are still studying, any type of legal advice clinics, law clinics that often universities run, anything that's sort of pro bono that you can get yourself involved in is a really good way, again, of just trying to get a foot in the door and showing that you've developed those skills that you can transfer when you become a barrister in the future. What I would say, and it's something that's been talked about already, is that although there is that emphasis on legal work experience, actually experience that may not be deemed necessarily directly legal can actually still be really, really useful in terms of those transferable skills. For example, just before I got my pupillage, I worked as an advocate at a charity for people with disabilities. So although there wasn't a huge amount of law involved in terms of the work that I did, it involved supporting and advocating on behalf of really vulnerable people, which then was a big factor which came into play when it came to interviews, and me being able to demonstrate that I was able to develop rapport with people. So also think outside of the legal work experience box as well, because any transferable skills are always going to be really helpful when it comes to the application process. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, very comprehensive there, Hannah. Thank you. And then lastly on this question, Jade, anything to add?
I would endorse everything that Hannah and Gerja and yourself have said. Going to court, sit and watch and just see how advocacy is done. Do marshalling as well. I did it and I really enjoyed seeing advocacy from the judge's perspective. And I marshalled at the court that I now work in the most, at Woolwich Crown Court. So it was really good to just now go back to the court that I actually marshalled one of the judges in. Also, like Hannah said, pro bono work is very, very good. I volunteered in university for I think about 5 years, 1 hour a week at a local legal advice centre. doing employment law, but it got me doing a lot of client interaction, drafting letters, speaking with vulnerable people who often didn't understand English as their first language, who didn't understand the law. So you got to work with a huge variety of people, and that sort of experience really looked good in applications because you got to show a lot of communication, people skills, empathy, sympathy. So that really, really worked. Also, again, paralegaling, if that's the route that you want to go down, paralegaling is actually a really good thing for you to do. Also, if any of you are with an inn of court, look at your inns to see what kind of work experience they have, if they do. They normally have opportunities for you to apply for marshalling. They also have a lot of mixed messes, I think, sometimes for you to sit with barristers so you can have formal dinners, interact with barristers, benches, judges, and ask questions and go to any talks. Also do mooting. I help John and Hayley with their mooting if anyone's done the competitions. They do them online and in person. So I think doing mooting is a really good way to just get your advocacy in, talk to judges and other pupils in your position as well. And they're really, really good for your CV. They boost your confidence. And there are a lot of good mooting competitions that also the inns do. And if your universities do them, also do them as well, because it really helps to get some advocacy into your work experience as well.
Great answer there, Jade. And yeah, very good pitch for our speed mooting competitions. Thank you. Right, we'll jump on to our third question there. What are your key tips for pupillage interviews? So we'll start with Matt on this one.
I would say don't be afraid to accept that there are things that you perhaps don't know or you're not, fully experienced in yet. When you're going for pupillage, chambers accept that you're not the full product, you're not finished. You are not a barrister. The point is you then have a year of training where they make you into a barrister. And if you try and bluster through questions where you clearly don't know the answer, it doesn't really impress anybody. A big part of learning in your pupillage is accepting that there's a lot that you still don't know, and being open to learning that is a big thing that chambers will be looking for. So if you do get a question, obviously if it's what's your name, then not knowing is a bit of a problem. But if it's something, specific about the law that you just don't know, then don't be afraid to accept that. They won't, be concerned about that particularly.
Excellent, great advice there. And then lastly on this question, Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the most important thing would be to just be yourself. It's so easy to think that there's a certain way a barrister looks, a certain way a barrister talks, but actually just being you is the most important thing you can be to do the best in your interviews. And sometimes just relax into it. I know it sounds easier said than done, but just to give a demonstration, in the place I actually ended up getting pupillage at, I did a written exercise, and let's put it this way, the first thing that they said to me was, it looks great, but actually it's an absolute car crash. And that was the first thing they said to me at the very beginning of the interview. So you can imagine me just withering away into my chair going, well, this is a complete waste of time. And actually, because I was then sort of like, well, it's gone, it's thrown away, I actually relaxed into the interview and was just me. And that actually was one of the reasons, in fact, it was one of them, probably the second reason as to why they ended up taking me on. And they even said that later, at a later date. So the takeaway I would take is be yourself in an interview and you have the best chance of getting it that way. Irrespective of anything else that's written, just be you.
Perfect. Great advice there. Question 4 then. Are there any common mistakes applicants make during the application or the interview process? If any of our panelists want to jump in on this one.
I think what picking up from the points that have already been made is acting like you know it when you don't know it. And it's okay to say you don't know. It's better that than blag it. Because obviously one of the advantages of being a barrister is that you're often very good at reading people and you can tell when someone isn't being honest because you're used to cross-examining people and seeing sort of witness demeanour frequently. And therefore it's quite obvious when someone is squirming and very uncomfortable that actually they don't know. And so you're best just saying you don't know as opposed to continuing on a course that everybody can see is awkward and uncomfortable. So yeah, I think going back to the point made previously about being your sort of authentic self, I think that's really important, and accepting that you don't know.
I'm happy to jump in there. My advice would be that the common mistakes are when people tell the panel how great they are at advocacy instead of showing them. So my biggest advice would be to make sure that you show them rather than just tell them. Everything that you say must be backed up with evidence, because it's all well and good you telling us how great you are at everything, but it needs to be supported. And that's the same in court. Is often when you make a statement in court, it has to be supported and backed up with evidence. So make sure that your applications and your answers in interview are the same. So often using things like the STAR method or the rule of three means that then you make sure that you're backing it up with evidence.
Brilliant advice there. Anyone else got anything to add on this question before we move on?
Just one from me. I have conducted interviews for pupillage applications, and one of the ones that I recall for the wrong reasons was one where somebody said about how great my chambers was in insurance law. We don't do insurance. Where's he got that from? So one mistake that applicants make in the interview process is getting their chambers mixed up. So please do your research before you go into that interview, knowing precisely why you're applying to that chambers, obviously, but also what they do.
Brilliant advice.
John, if I can piggyback off that, again, it goes back to the research aspect of I've done recruitment ever since I started as a tenant, and when I get that batch of say 15 applications to review, and I get one that really overemphasizes an area of law which is perhaps a teeny tiny part of our chambers, or possibly even not from our chambers, it immediately goes to the side. So it's making sure that it makes sense to want to look at a chambers that does an area of law, but you have to really put it in the wider context of the chambers. How much is this their main areas? How much am I, ignoring perhaps what else they might be doing? So you have to really, when you're pitching it to a chambers, make sure that you're not putting them off by ignoring what they consider to be the heart of perhaps their practice. But of course, I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear about the smaller parts as well, but it can't be your main focus.
Yeah, excellent advice there. Any more before we jump on to the next one?
Just going to give one very small piece of advice, which is in interviews, when you're asked a question that perhaps you hadn't anticipated and it might be a bit of a curveball or slightly unusual, don't hesitate to take a moment to think of your answer, because it's far better to just take that time just to think about what you're about to say rather than immediately enter into a lot of waffle that you haven't necessarily thought through well. You won't be criticised by an interview panel for just taking that time to think through your answer before embarking upon it. So just allow yourself that moment of thought.
Excellent. Great advice, Hannah. Okay, up next, how would you structure an answer to the question, why are you applying to this set of chambers? If I haven't, and there's a second part to the question, so you can deal with one or both aspects. If I haven't completed a mini pupillage with a set, how can I show that I'm interested? So in short, how are we dealing with the question, why are you applying to this set? Any volunteers?
I'm not at chambers, but with people who have asked me about that question, I think I've always told them to actually, like Rachel said, research why you are applying to that particular chambers. What is it that they do? What cases have they done? What work have their juniors done? Because you'll be coming in as a pupil, hopefully getting tenancy as a junior. What work have their juniors done? And what path do you want to follow in that particular chambers? Is there, for instance, a particular area of law that they do that you see yourself doing in the next 3 to 5 years with them? Are there any particular cases that their counsel have done that you've seen in court that you like, that you would like to be instructed in if you were to be with them? So I think one of the things I always say is just to research that chambers and see what they do, what work they do, and how you see yourself progressing at that particular chambers. Also look at other things such as any ethos that they have, equality and diversity. If there's anything else that they do they do a lot of volunteering? Are they active in the community? Are there other things besides the law that they do that you like, that you can also see yourself being a part of at that chambers as to why you want to be there? And also think about what you can bring to them as a new and fresh pupil. What can you give to them? Because that's something that they want. They want to invest in you, and they want to make sure that you get the best out of that pupillage. So I think those are the things that I would say. In terms of not doing a mini pupillage, again, I think it's echoed in what I've said, are the things that you've seen on their website, that cases that they've done, that you can show that you're interested in, despite the fact that you haven't done a mini pupillage with them. I don't think it's the end of the world if you haven't done a mini pupillage with them. There are certainly reasons as to why you probably haven't. You didn't apply on time, you didn't see it, etc. But I don't think it matters much, as long as you can show that you're interested in that chambers and you have a demonstrated ability to want to be there.
Brilliant. Fantastic advice there. Anyone else want to add anything to this question?
I think coupled off the back of that would probably be the location aspect, and that can probably cover both sides of that question, why you're interested in that particular set, but also if you haven't done a mini pupillage there, what's something that draws you to that. I know when I was certainly applying for pupillages, I did a sort of I'm not saying do this, by the way, but I'm just saying learn from my past experiences, and that was I did a scatter approach of sets where I hadn't done any minis with them, but the location wise I had a lot of family in those areas, so if they were worried about, well, how are you going to get yourself set up, are you going to have that support aspect there, I had a lot of family sort of dotted around, which helped to answer those kind of questions, am I interested in those areas. Again, if you haven't done a mini pupillage there, you can go to any court in the country, Magistrates, Crown Court, and go and shadow. And it might just be that you identify certain advocates who come from a certain set. And like John said, even if you have a few words with them, they might be able to give you some pieces of advice, and you might be able to use that in your application and say, well, actually, this person was really forthcoming, was really welcoming. And if that's the sort of types of people that chambers are taking, that's certainly a place that I would like to apply to and certainly get involved in. The other thing I would say as well, why that chambers, look at the extracurriculars that those chambers organisations do. You might find that they are involved in a number of initiatives, such as going into schools, giving presentations, doing wider works with different organisations like the police, etc. And that might be something that you are also interested in. But if you do pro bono work, for example, you can demonstrate that sort of aspect as well. And it sort of ties in with what Jade said about the ethos. If that's the type of thing that chambers are doing and that's the type of thing that you want to try and promote and get involved in, and you can already demonstrate that with your experience, then it sort of ties in quite nicely. That's what I would say.
Brilliant. Great advice there. Anyone else got anything to add on this question?
I can piggyback off that point. It's about, in a sort of similar vein, look at what chambers are doing in terms of their marketing. Are they writing articles for things? Are they doing lectures? Those sorts of things give you a bit of insight into the ethos of the chambers as well, and their sort of key interests. And that's a good way, if you haven't had the chance for mini pupillage, but you've come across these people in those other spheres, that's something that can then bring you back to the sort of point of how perhaps your interests align with chambers' interests, and in that way demonstrate your interest.
Excellent. Thank you, Alice. All right, we'll move on to our next one. How do I make my answer to the question, why do you believe you will make a good barrister, stand out amongst the common answers? So, in short, when asked the question, why do you believe you'll make a good barrister? How do you make your answer stand out?
What I would say about this answer is I think it's personal to you, and obviously the skills are required, like advocacy and communication. But I think you need to show that you have an understanding about what the job is about in different areas of law. So, for example, a civil barrister will have different skills to a criminal barrister, and you need to be able to show your understanding of what a day-to-day life is like for a criminal barrister, for example. So it might be things like determination, and then you might decide that you want to back that up with evidence. So again, like I've said before, not to just go with a simple statement like I have good communication skills. Make sure you back that up and relate it to the area of law. So you might say, for example, and this will be useful as a criminal barrister because I'm dealing with different types of people in society. So relate it to that area of law as well.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Hannah?
It follows very similarly to what Gabrielle's just said in terms of her answer and what she said earlier about evidence in your answers. So I think in terms of why you'll make a good barrister, it's really important that rather than just making bold statements to say, I have good communication skills or I have the ability to develop rapport with people from all walks of society, to be able to say, and from my experience working, for example, for me, it was working at the charity as an advocate and being able to back that up. So don't just make those bold statements that you have those skills, evidence where it's come from. And as Gabrielle said earlier, that then very much falls in line with what we do on a daily basis, that we can't simply say to a judge, this is what should happen, and the judge is going to say why, or where's your evidence for that, and it's making sure that you can support your answer by way of examples and evidence and show that you possess those skills that they would be looking for.
Fantastic. I think one thing I would add for what it's worth is remember as well that the sort of skill base that's required for a barrister goes beyond just simple oral advocacy in court. There's a significant amount of written advocacy, and I imagine, if you do civil law, you do a lot more written advocacy than we do as criminal barristers. And also it's conference skills as well. And as Gabrielle mentioned, particularly in crime, you are dealing with people from all walks of life. And I literally do mean all walks of life. So you need to be able to relate to all manner of people and have them effectively take your advice. What you need to do is think about how you build up all those other skills, not just advocacy in court, but also your conferencing skills, also your written skills, and other beyond that. Think about how you evidence those within your applications as well. So it's about sort of thinking outside the box there, I think. So we'll move on to our next question then. How does one demonstrate an interest in a given area of law in a written application? Any of our panelists got anything to add on that, or anything to comment, I should say?
I suppose if you've assigned yourself to certain charities that specialise in certain areas of law, like domestic abuse or something to do with children and education, then that would obviously demonstrate that naturally you gravitate towards that area, and that's something that's of an interest to you. So selecting the type of experience, whether it be charitable, the type of courts that you go to shadow, that's one way that you can sort of direct your application to focus the reader's mind that, it's apparent that they have a real interest in this. But I think following on from a lot of the advice that's already been given, you don't have to necessarily think that I want to be a family barrister, so I must only do things that help me with family. Many years ago, I was a nurse, many years ago, and many of the skills that I learnt as a nurse around communication, comforting someone when they get very bad news, sitting with relatives when somebody dies, they're very much the skills and the transferable skills that I use now when someone loses a child to adoption, because it's a loss, it's a similar skill. So I don't think you need to go down a rabbit hole of only thinking I only want to do this area, so I'll only have this sort of experience, because so many skills are transferable. And I think you need to think about, actually, is this going to enrich me in a way that's going to help me as a barrister be persuasive, be a good communicator, be a very good listener, because that's such an important skill that lots of people don't really appreciate you need to have as a barrister. You need to listen. So I don't think you need to worry so much that if you really want to be a barrister of one area, you must only get experience in that area, because I don't think you do.
Yeah, great advice. Certainly, I paralegaled in personal injury for many years. And that's what helped me ultimately get my training contract in crime, because the skills from PI were so transferable. And that's what helped me when I qualified as a solicitor many years ago. Anyone else got any advice on that question?
I would say people are surprised how easy it is to actually go and watch most courts as well. Most hearings are public hearings. So if you have an interest in a specific area of law, check out where near you those cases are heard. And sometimes, if you've got time, I appreciate people have got jobs and families and things, but if you've got time, you can just go along and watch hearings, turn up in the morning, see what's going on, and just sit in the back of court and kind of see what's going on. There are online hearings as well. For example, in the employment tribunal, if there's a hearing going on via the video platform, you can email the employment tribunal and ask them to join as an observer, and they will let you do that. So it's going that slight bit extra to actually go and watch the hearings. You can then put that in your application and say, well, I've not just read about this online. I've actually gone and watched these hearings because I find it interesting. And I think that's something that, is fairly easy to do and you can do right now.
Great advice there. Anyone else got anything to contribute on this question before we move on?
The only thing I would say is don't feel scared. Obviously, it's a matter for you and how comfortable you feel, but don't feel scared to draw upon your own personal experiences. It's something I did when I was going through sort of pupillage applications and interviews and whatnot. And so, for example, I did inquests at uni. It was an elective module, did that, found it really interesting, knew nothing about it beforehand. Did it as my dissertation, and it's not something that you might readily come across sort of as easy to go and sit into court and watch as in comparison to criminal cases. But I had my own personal experience with an inquest in the family and things like that. And I was able to draw my own personal experience coupled with the academic side of things with university and able to apply my interest with that regard. So it's a matter for you, obviously, like I said, how comfortable you feel in terms of how far you want to go down that area and deep dive if you want to. But at least you know that if you've got that personal experience, you've got that personal touch. And we've mentioned things where people will always have the academia, perhaps in terms of degree, bar course and the rest of it. But if you've got your own personal flair that you can add, it's something that will sort of set you apart from others and will make you a unique applicant.
Excellent. Great advice there. I think the other obvious point as well is if you've got an interest in a particular area and you scored well in that module at university, mention that, because that is a very easy way to show that you've got an interest in that area. And then if you've gone on to study advanced modules linked to that and of course done well in those modules, well, that's even further evidence of that, isn't it? So that's a very easy, quick, short line that no doubt will score you some points and show some interest on your application forms. Okay, next question. Our panelists may or may not be able to answer this. So if there's nobody that has any of this experience and can answer this question, then we'll move on, but we'll see. Does being a GDL student place you at a disadvantage when applying for pupillage? So do we have anyone that's completed, any of our panelists completed the GDL before going to the bar?
I haven't. So if somebody hasn't, please jump in. But I can talk from the perspective of recruitment, having looked at these applications. Certainly from our chambers, and I suspect all chambers, there is no bar to or requirement to do any particular modules, perhaps, or any particular given route. Frankly, my chambers, it's about a 50-50 split between who's done GDL and who's done law at university. And in terms of what you do learn in the GDL, you learn the core modules, so obviously gets you your qualifications. So strictly speaking, no, you are still going to be reviewed in the same way. It's all going to be done based on your ability to show your intellect, your interest, and your skills. The fact that you may have done it, done your qualification section through university or GDL isn't a factor that most chambers will be looking at. Whether perhaps it's different learning it all within the space of a year or 3 years, that I can't speak to, I'm afraid. But certainly from a recruitment side, you're not going to be looked at differently just for doing that GDL.
Excellent, great advice there. I think, yeah, certainly that's what I've seen as well. I know lots of people at the bar who've done the GDL, so I don't see that it's any bar whatsoever, if you pardon the pun, to get into the bar. We've probably got time for one or two more questions. This is a question we've had which goes a little bit beyond the pupillage application process, but might be interesting for people because, if people get pupillage, they'll become tenants, etc. So this might be an interesting one for people to have answered. What is the most challenging aspect of being a barrister, and how do you overcome this? So do any of our panelists have any thoughts on this one?
I think it can be very lonely being a barrister in that you are often pitted against people in your set, all put forward for the same work. And so you are competing with people who may be friends or your roommates and people you know well in chambers. And if you're on a case with somebody who you're against from your chambers and you don't know the answer to something, you can't necessarily then go on the chambers WhatsApp group and email everybody or message everybody because your opponent will know that you don't know. And I think there's a temptation when you're self-employed, certainly for me, even having been a lawyer for 20 years, that you're worried sometimes that you won't work again. So if there's a quiet period, I don't know if anybody else shares this or if it's just my paranoia, but if there's a quiet period, you don't think, oh my God, I've got some time off. This is amazing. I'm going to chill. You think, am I going to work? I've got to overwork when it's busy. And burn yourself out. And I think there is a real temptation when you're self-employed to do that. And also when you're, as a barrister, you have to perform well every time you're in court because people are paying you lots of money and you want to get instructed by other people. So you need to be constantly on your game. And that can be quite challenging because life happens and things happen to you in life that mean that your job isn't always your priority. And that's really difficult. So I think although it's an absolute privilege being a barrister, and I don't underestimate how wonderful it is, it's also at times really, really hard and lonely and challenging. For all the good days, there are also some bad days, and that's I suspect the same for every career, really. I don't want to undersell it, but I think you've got to be realistic. It's hard work, lots of late nights, many weekend plans cancelled, and although as you get more senior, that's less and less happening and much more rewarding financially, especially. It's really tough. You need to dig deep sometimes.
Anyone else got any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I echo what Anna said. I think, to be fair, a lot of it is challenging. I'm employed, so it's slightly different because I'm not at the self-employed bar. But what I will say being an employed barrister is that when I started, I found everything challenging. The one thing that I did like about being employed was that I go to courts only in South London, so I knew where I would be. I can only go to courts about 90 minutes away from my house door to door, so that was a bit of a shining light that I knew that I would be closer to home. Apart from that, as Anna said, the workload is intense. You have to perform at your best when you're in court nearly every single time. And I think one of the things that I found challenging was just that there was so much information to take in. I didn't know when to shut off or how to shut off. I wanted to take nearly everything that came because I wanted as much experience and I didn't want to let anyone down. You do a lot of late night work. You do a lot of weekend work, as Anna said. You work on leave. I book leave to still work. I work on bank holidays. So there's a lot of work that goes into the job. And I think overcoming it just comes, as Anna said, with experience. Also just creating boundaries. As you get more senior, as Anna said, you do have a bit more flexibility to kind of say no to certain things, or just, not right now, or this is something that maybe somebody else can do, or, for instance, I want to focus on this kind of work. So just set some boundaries as and when you can. And I think also just forming a really good support work, whether it's in work or outside of work, having good friends, having a good relationship with your practice managers, your clerks, the people around you, to just really help you through this. Because being at the bar is a lot of work, and I feel like only us understand it because of the amount of things that we do and because of the kind of work that you're going to be doing that other people won't necessarily understand. So I think just having a really good support system, but also, as Anna said, being prepared for what you're about to do and what you're about to go into, because it's a lot. But it's definitely something that, as with time, it gets better.
Absolutely. I had to laugh when you were saying that. That's sort of the direct contrast to my practice, because 90 minutes is a local hearing for me. I think I did a 350-mile round trip to court today, but it's the nature of my practice because I've got a certain specialism. I get sent all over the country. I think we've had a bit of doom and gloom with that question, actually, so I think we need to end with a positive. So on the flip of that, let's hear some positives about being a barrister. So does anyone want to chime in with some of the positives of life at the bar?
I'll say one thing in against all the negatives I said, that when you go to court for a 10 o'clock hearing and you're done by 11, you can go to Oxford Street. No one knows where you are. You can go shopping all afternoon, meet your friends for lunch. It's great.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just saying that it depends on your character, but I think just the sheer amount of people that you come across from all walks of life just makes the job so colourful and interesting. Forget the law for a moment, just the people are fascinating. And so for me, that's something that makes the day go more quickly. And it also means that no day is ever the same. The law might not have changed much from one case to the next, but the people certainly do. So for me, that's one of the positive things about the bar.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably a good place to end on the questions, and we'll go on to our sort of final segment. So we're going to finish here with a very short soundbite from each of our barristers, so 30, maybe 60 seconds, just with their top piece of advice for pupillage applicants. So the final sort of words of wisdom to leave you with tonight. So we'll start with Alice.
I think you've got to believe in yourself and really have a good whack at it, and not be disappointed if you don't get it the first time round. The majority of people I know don't get it, and they're excellent candidates. Some of them, I'm convinced, were far smarter than me, and it took them an extra year or two to get there. The reality is there is a degree of chance and luck about who might pick up your application, what sort of SIFs you might be in. You might have a bad sort of time personally around the time of applications. They might not come out as good. And you have to back yourself and keep going at it and work on yourself and improve yourself to get there, because it's incredibly competitive. But if you're not backing yourself, then who will?
Great advice there. Anna, any words of wisdom for us?
Yes, I would say don't give up. As our last speaker just said, it's so true that lots of people don't get it on the first go. And even when you're a qualified barrister, if you apply to sit as a judge, there's lots of examples of things that you do that you don't get on the first run, but you learn so much from failure. You learn to pick yourself back up, to try again, to do things differently. And although it hurts and it stings and you feel humiliated, actually you learn an awful lot about yourself by doing that, and other people learn something about you and your resilience. So what I would say is don't give up. It will happen one day, and keep going.
Excellent. Gabriel, any takeaway message for our attendees tonight?
Yes. So my top tip would be to be yourself. I think it's really easy to start comparing yourself to others. And one thing to remember is there's not a perfect candidate. As you can see from today, every barrister is completely different. We all look different. We are all different. We all speak different from different areas, do different areas of law. There's not one perfect mold. So if you're different, you've done different things, use that as your advantage. Don't feel like it's a negative or a hurdle. Use it to your advantage.
Brilliant. Gerjo, any closing words?
I'll sound like a broken record for John and Hayley, because I say this in every event that I do for them, and that is shy bairns getting out. It's a canny little saying from the Northeast, but ultimately what it means is you don't get unless you try. So unless you're applying, unless you're putting yourself out there, unless you're getting the experiences and the opportunities, you're not going to get anything in return. So keep applying, don't give up. And like Gabrielle said, nobody's perfect, and we all make mistakes. No matter how experienced you are, how many years of call, how many years of tenancy, they will happen. It's natural, because nobody is perfect. So don't be disheartened, keep going, and you will get there.
Brilliant. Hannah, any final words for us?
Perhaps the piece of advice that I would give, particularly if you've got lots of friends or colleagues that you know who are also applying for pupillage, is that comparison is the thief of joy. Please do not compare your experiences to those of your friends who might be telling you they've got loads of interviews. Don't be put off by other candidates when you get to interview who feel the need to tell you they've got 10 other interviews. You are there just as rightly as anybody else, and you deserve to be there. Learn from your experiences. If it's not worked out, persevere. Your hard work will pay off, but learn from things that you think perhaps haven't gone so well. But otherwise, obviously, best of luck to all of you.
Great advice. Jade, any final words?
I would endorse everything that everyone else has said. I think back yourself, have as much confidence. Don't be afraid to also just reach out to people, whether it's on LinkedIn, going to court and getting as much experience and making as many connections as possible. And also what Hannah said, just don't focus on other people's journeys, but focus on yours. Yours will be very different and personable to you. You may get pupillage on your 5th year, but when you get it, it will be because of the work that you've put in. So I think focus on you and everything that you have done and will do, because only you will know how long it's taken you to get to there. So best of luck to everyone doing pupillage this year.
Excellent. Thank you, Jade. Matt, any words of wisdom for us?
Having gone towards the end, everyone else has taken all the good advice, so I'm going to have to be a bit of a broken record for a second, but I would say the advice about being yourself is the most important thing for pupillage. There's a very outdated view that when you go up for pupillage, you have to be very professional and very, put together and absolutely flawless. And it's not the case at all. The barristers that you will see in and around court are oftentimes not perfect or flawless or put together at all. We all have our own personalities, and your personality is what makes you unique. And in a sea of pupillage applications, a bit of uniqueness never hurt anybody. So don't be afraid to just let your personality shine through a little bit. And yeah, best of luck to you all.
Brilliant, great advice. And last but not least, Rachel, any advice for our attendees?
I think my best advice is, I know it sounds like a bit blustery, but it's just breathe. Breathe, walk away from your application when you're doing your applications, come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes, don't leave it last minute. And the same also with your interviews. Just breathe. If you don't know the answer, yes, say if you don't know the answer. If you need time to take stock, don't be afraid to take time to take stock. If you also need just a bit of a break from doing multiple mini pupillages, meeting, etc., and decide, no, I'm just going to go on that wild holiday whilst I can, then do it, because actually you've then also got something yet again that's interesting to talk about, other than just, yeah, I've just been on the treadmill of doing all these things, because once you're in the job, it's a bit of a treadmill at times.
That's excellent advice from all of our panelists, and I think I'll leave you with these final few words, because as we've heard, it can be quite disheartening if you go through various rounds and you're not obtaining pupillage. And the one thing I like to remind people is, if you want to get into this profession, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You don't need to qualify and get into this profession by the age of 22, 23, because, ideally, if this is going to be your profession for life, you're going to be here for many, many decades. Or even if you're joining the profession later in life, you're still going to be here for quite some time. For those of you that don't know, it took me 11 years from finishing my bar course to finally start practicing as a barrister. So I think I'm the sort of epitome of perseverance. I went through everything. I tried so many different things and built up so much experience. So if you're not getting pupillage now, don't worry. Use that time to build your experience. And if you're determined, you'll get there one day. So just remember, marathon, not a sprint. So that brings us towards the end of the session. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time this evening. You're all obviously very busy, and I'm sure that our attendees have really benefited from your advice tonight. And once again, thank you to all of you for attending. The fact that you are attending a session like this shows that you are very determined candidates, and you're going that extra mile. You're doing what you can to build up your CV and hopefully get into this profession. So I hope that you've thoroughly enjoyed the session tonight. It has been recorded. It will go on our YouTube channel. I can't say when, because we've got a backlog of videos to edit at the minute, but it'll be on the YouTube channel sooner rather than later. So that's the last part of our inaugural pupillage event, or inaugural two-part pupillage event anyway. The next thing we've got is our national speed mooting competition in April, which is open to anyone as long as you're not qualified. So visit the website speedmooting.com for more info on that. And I think that just leaves me to say thank you for attending, and see you at the next one.